It's time for another round of shamelessly ranked punditry here on the New Hampshire Journal podcast. And we are lucky to have a couple of incredibly smart people, though not about politics, best I can tell, based on their... No, I'm totally kidding. Scott Spradling is comms professional extraordinaire, and Bill O'Brien is the Republican National Committeeman for New Hampshire. But for our purposes, he's a former Speaker of the House and a practicing attorney. Is that right, Mr. O'Brien? Practicing?
I am. Yes, I am, Michael.
Okay. Well, eventually you'll get it right and you can stop practicing. So I happen to think that the biggest news story of the week is one that's getting very little attention, which is the Claremont decision by the Ayotte administration. They want to go to the Supreme Court and have the judges reconsider and possibly throw out the original Claremont rulings from 1993. I happen to think that the biggest immediate political story is the story of the ICE facility being pulled because of what it does to the governor's race and Governor Kelly Ayotte as well. So I want to start with the politics and then get to the comms. So, Bill O'Brien, do I have those right about the big stories of the week? Are those as big as I think they are?
Well, yeah, they certainly are from a New Hampshire perspective. I also think the State of the Union address by the president was just a tour de force. It was just a fantastic performance, but okay. More importantly,
let's save that for a second, because I want to completely disagree with what you're saying in a few minutes, and I don't want to get sidetracked. So, real quickly, can you explain to people what the Claremont thing mean? What does that mean in politics in New Hampshire and why it's important?
Sure. Almost 30 years ago, the court got swept up into a national movement that was pushed by big spenders in the education and industrial movement to get spending up to the state level. So they had a series of cases across the country. The Claremont case was the New Hampshire case that basically said education is a state responsibility, not a local responsibility. That was a 1997 decision. And they took very thin language out of the Constitution. The legislature cherished education and said, oh, that means you have to define what it is, you have to pay for it. Right. And it was just a really poor decision, and one that for years has deserved to be overturned rather. And I think we have a case that just might do that.
So, Scott Spradling, Republicans tend to not like talking about education because the perception is that education's a Democrats' issue like healthcare, but, defense and crime and immigration, that's a Republican issue. But I think that the property tax angle changes all this. So from a guy watching how the story unfolds, what do you see as the kind of the battle that's going to happen in the public sphere as the two parties try to address this?
Yeah, this is interesting. And let me just say, Michael, I do think that education with a capital E is something that everybody cares about. I do believe that that's a place where we all want to make sure that our kids get the best that they can, that they're well educated, and that they are part of our workforce and cultural development, all of that. I think we're all on the same page there. As pertaining to this is an historic moment. And I agree with you. I think this is a really significant moment in time for our political conversation around public education and school funding. We've gone for decades, as Bill points out, under what has been a legal fight around how we do it, how much we spend, where that money goes. And, terms like Bill mentioned, cherish our education. Right. We've also gone around what I think have been the two central discussion terms around the original Claremont decision and then the follow-up, which is what exactly is the cost of an adequate education, because adequacy is another term that is a key component of this legal discussion. And when it came to property taxes, to your point, Michael, the ruling was it had to be equal in value, uniform in rate, so that every town, every district had what was essentially the same amount of funding. That sort of universality has created the complications because, as we all know, property values differ around the state. And so the structure itself, that is a property tax driven funding mechanism, is complicated by geography, quite literally. So to have the Attorney General's office make this move it's an historic one, and it certainly changes the direction of what our debate might be. And in how we figure out going forward how to fund a public education.
Yeah, and I think the things that make this up in the air, one is, as Bill O'Brien pointed out in the New Hampshire Journal, a recent story, it moves education funding decisions back into the political sphere with legislators fighting as opposed to judges doing it. And Democrats think that's a win for them. And in the past, it certainly has been. But at this era of high property taxes, I'm not so sure. And then just the earthquake that's going to happen if the people who have been trying to use school funding as a way to force New Hampshire into a broad-based tax plan, whether it's sales tax or income tax, I think that's going to be there. Now let's talk about the more immediate story, Bill O'Brien, which is the ending of the decision of the Department of Homeland Security to pull this ICE facility. I happen to think that was the one stick that Democrat Cindy Warmington was having some effect with, beating Kelly Ayotte with it. I thought it was really landing some blows. And what happens? Kristi Noem shows up and pulls the stick out of her hand. I don't think the Democrats have another issue like it. Am I wrong?
Well, I think what Kelly Ayotte has done here shows a couple of things. One is she very much cares about border security. She's worked on it. She worked on funding Northern Shield. She worked on the northern border issues, but she listened to her constituents as well. And it's clear that the folks in Merrimack were very uncomfortable with having an ICE facility situated there. Right. And Kelly Ayotte has the contacts and the drive and the advocacy to solve this problem. And she did solve this problem. Clearly, we all want the president's efforts to remove criminal illegal aliens from our midst to be successful. So far, it's probably factored very heavily into a historic reduction in crime rates over the last year. It's fantastic what's been achieved. But on the other hand, if folks in Merrimack or anywhere in New Hampshire are uncomfortable with an ICE facility in their area, their towns, then I know Kelly Ayotte will come to bat for them.
Scott Spradling, I thought the Democrats were doing a very good job of tying this, however unfairly, of tying this issue to Kelly Ayotte. Do you agree with me that this takes away a what would have been an effective communications topic for them in the November election?
There's no doubt that had this moved forward into reality and that we were dealing with this facility, it would have been an enormous challenge pragmatically and politically for Governor Ayotte. There's no doubt in my mind. Michael, one of the things that's an interesting wrinkle in this as well is that if you just look at this through the Republican conversation, it felt like there were a few fissures that were developing around this issue and conversation where you had Republicans in Merrimack saying, whoa, stop, don't do this. And other Republicans throughout the state that were saying, wait a minute, this is a potential litmus test around whether you support this policy and whether you support the president. And I think the governor's fast actions may have put Band-Aids over those fissures very, very quickly. And I guess I'd point to our majority leader, Jason Osborne, who was initially saying, we've got to support the president. We have to be doing something. Massachusetts is creating real problems for us on this front. We've got to do something. But then he also was on record saying, I'm glad and support the governor, and I'm glad that she was able to bring some closure to this. So while there is definite partisan impact, I think the GOP family also avoided what could have been quite a scrum.
That's a very good point. I've been highlighting the fact that Democrats are very out of step in New Hampshire on immigration. The new NHJournal poll that just came out just days before this announcement showed that while Granite Staters hated the ICE aspect, watching the images of violence and fighting, whatever, they overwhelmingly believe that if you're in the country illegally, you should be deported, period. No additional conversation. Whereas Democrats rejected that and said, no, only if you have committed some other crimes. But Bill O'Brien, there was a fissure opening up. 75% of Republicans told us they wanted the ICE facility here. Having this fight drawn out would have not been good for keeping the Republican team together in November.
No, and so I think the result that Governor Ayotte came up with is just an excellent result. And if there's a need for an ICE facility in New Hampshire, I'm sure Homeland Security will work with the governor on it, and we can come up with a great solution there.
The solution is Massachusetts. Come on. Massachusetts is where the illegals are. Boston's where the illegals are. I think that it would be terrific to have it right there, right next to the Golden Dome, right up on Beacon Hill, a beacon of immigration security right there. What do you think?
You have my support for that, Michael.
Michael, before we leave that issue, one
Sure.
other thought here too is that I do think that this circumstance revealed some real communication gap problems between the federal government and our state
Oh,
government.
absolutely.
I, for one, think that the governor was blindsided by this. I think that the way in which we found out about this facility raises some real questions about how the federal
Right.
government reaches out. I mean, I know we've got the ACLU, we've got the
Mhm.
Freedom of Information Act request and the fuse that was lit to start this conversation, but there probably needs to be a way
Oh.
better process of communicating from the Beltway to individual states to talk about the prospects of these kinds of things in the first place so that a governor like Kelly isn't blindsided in a situation like this.
Look, I don't feel sorry for politicians. They chose to get into politics and they're going to take their lumps and life's not fair. But I got to tell you, when the staffer down in the department of nobody ever heard of you, contacted the ACL, whatever, however that worked, ACL, I felt bad for. Then when the acting head of DHS goes, "Oh yeah, I just talked to Kelly yesterday," and of course it was totally
Right,
untrue. He was totally wrong.
right.
He misunderstood. It was the wrong state. I'm like, "Gee, she cannot catch a break on this thing, can she?"
No,
But
no,
speaking
and
of,
that creates real problems. And I mean, Bill would be able to say better than I ever could because he was this former House Speaker. But your political brand trades off of authenticity and
okay.
credibility.
So
And
let's. I
when
want to jump
questions
on the
like
word
that are
brand. I
raised,
don't. I don't want to take too much of your time, guys' time, and I want to jump on the word brand because you brought it up. I get asked all the time. I don't understand. How can the Republicans elect, 5 governor races in a row and control the state house, and they get killed in the federal government? And I say it's real simple. It's the brand. That the brand of the Republican Party isn't a fit with New England, which is why there's one New England federal elected official north of New York City. But at the state level, it's different. It's not a brand problem. So starting with you, Scott, since you brought it up, and then we'll go to you, Bill. What when people ask you, what is your answer for all Democrat at the federal level, basically nonstop since the 2010, Tea Party, and all Republican almost nonstop since 2016 at the state level?
about the brand.
How do you explain when people ask you why is New Hampshire like this? The other New
Oh,
England states are all blue. And here you
yeah,
have
sure.
all blue fed, all red state. How do you explain that?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the heart and soul of our state is within its motto of a live free or die. I think our state is still driven very much by a sense of the independent voter, as partisan as politics can be and really is right now. I think our state turns off of that group of voters who sit in the middle that don't necessarily, even if they lean one way or the other with their beliefs, they
Right.
don't espouse to either party. They're listening and they end up being kind of the referees of the battle between the two major parties. And the times, the personalities, and the decisions made by lawmakers leading up to every single election, I think dictate that. It gives us a sense of, no pun intended, true independence in our election cycle. But I think that it is a huge swath of voters
Right.
that dictate the outcomes, and they are the ones that largely have to be spoken to and connected with by our legislative leaders one way or the other. And I think at times Republicans have done a better job. At times Democrats have done a better job. But it's the independent voter that sits in the middle that dictates the outcomes here.
So, Bill, what do you tell people at the RNC gatherings when they look at you and they shake their head and they go, I don't get it. Do you have to be named Sununu to get elected in New Hampshire?
I think what I tell them is when Michael Graham asked me that question, I'm saying let's defer it to November 6th and let's see if it has any basis anymore because we're going to change that. We have some
So
great
you think
candidates.
Republicans are going to win a federal race in New Hampshire in
Oh,
2026?
for sure. We're going to have a strong senatorial candidate running against a guy who couldn't get on his feet for a moment to say, I
Right.
support American citizens over illegal aliens. That was a crazy thing to do. It was from the party of crazy. He's going to have to own that. Do you think the people in New Hampshire agree that their elected officials should not prize or take care of American citizens before illegal aliens? It's the party of crazy, and Pappas has not been able to avoid being crazy himself.
I'll talk to you off the air about a wager about 2026, Bill O'Brien. But I want to go back to you, Scott Spradling. So obviously, when Trump looked out and said, I want you to stand up right now and say, you put Americans ahead of illegal immigrants, every Democrat remained seated, including the entire federal delegation from New Hampshire. You're a comms guy. You knew it was a stunt. But as I thought, Holly Noveletsky, who's we just had on the podcast and who's running for in the first convention, as you pointed out, she says it may have been a gotcha question, but hey, Chris, he got you. Like, why didn't you just stand up? And that's my question is, from a once again, setting aside who's right or wrong, whatever, but from a calm standpoint, it seems like an unforced error to me. But am I missing part of this? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, listen, I think it's interpretive at this point, and we're also looking at the State of the Union that whether you've got Donald Trump sitting at the podium or anybody else,
Right.
that is political theater. Bottom line, it's political theater. And I would add to it that in this environment right now, outside of the major issues of the day, where it seems like the two parties get along and the process of government on a lot of the other issues where they have to work together and get things done that we don't ever read about because it's just the sort of the day-to-day governing, they're doing fine. But when you get to that point with the spotlight shining bright in the partisan environment that we have right now, where we have the strongest of strong opinions about how Republicans feel about Dems and Dems feel about Republicans, I don't think there's much of anything he could have said that would have gotten the Democrats on their feet.
Yeah, but I'm asking a different question. If you're just once again, if you're just trying to handle the comms right, and you see this, do you love apple pie or do you want to beat grandma in the face with it? Don't you just stand up? See what I'm saying?
So I don't. On that issue, considering we're talking about the immigration issue, there's nothing that's going to move Dems. And I don't know, personally, I don't know that that's a mistake because I think the national polls are showing that people, to your point a little while ago, national polls, I think, are showing that people would like to see the reforms made so that we do not have anyone in this country illegally, especially committing crimes, but like, let's follow the rule of law. It's the process by which it's happening. It's the logistics, or some might argue the tactics that are being done that have people upset. And that's the majority from the polls that I've seen, especially independent voters. They're not happy with the way in which we're trying to go about that. So if you're throwing down the gauntlet to Dems on that issue, I don't think it's necessarily a mistake. I think it would have been a bigger surprise had they stood.
Well, once again, if I'm Chris Pappas, why I would just avoid the fight, but that's who knows who's right, and we'll find out later. But Bill O'Brien, you brought up the State of the Union and about how important it is. I'm sorry. No State of the Union matters ever. They are forgotten. As a press guy, I hate them because you have to obsess with them for 72 hours and then they're totally forgotten. No one ever remembers what was said afterwards. I will say though, Scott Bradley, you're right about the theater. I mean, Donald Trump has stepped up the theater. I mean, we've gone from political theater to full Broadway. I was expecting him to break out into Ethel Merman, you'll be swell, you'll be great, So, Bill O'Brien, why should I care about this State of the Union when no other State of the Union has mattered?
Because you saw New Hampshire's federal delegation not get up when people said, do you care about American citizens? You saw them watch a woman in the gallery cry about her murdered daughter, overcome with grief about the death of her daughter, Irina Zarutsky, at the hands of a criminal who's gone through the revolving doors of the criminal justice system. And they couldn't even stand to show her that they cared about it. These people are crazy, and their craziness has turned them into monsters. And they're going to have trouble getting elected. I really think Scott has a great ability to analyze away what is a fatal error, which is they showed they didn't care about the American people.
I don't know that we live in an era of fatal errors anymore. I think the news cycle that lasts 72 seconds or whatever, I don't know, but we shall see. I want to wrap up with this. When you look at the state of New Hampshire, on the one hand, you can say it's kind of a bellwether for the country. For example, Trump narrowly lost here in deep blue New England in 2024. In a national level election, he won by like 1. He lost here by like 3. We're in that ballpark. You look at polls, and we tend to be where people are, and yet you do see this phenomenal divide between the federal and the state level. And I guess what I'd ask you is, do you think that New Hampshire over time is going to, over the next few years, is going to become more and more like New England and like the Northeast? Or is it going to trend the way it has been since I've been here the last 6-7 years, which is becoming more and more of an island? It stands out every year as being more different from its neighbors. Bill O'Brien.
When I was speaker, so 10, 12 years ago now, probably a little bit more, the party registrations were fairly even. And now there's many more Republicans who are registered than there are Democrats. I think as a whole, we're becoming a more conservative state. And indeed, I think you'll start looking at some of the states surrounding us. I know it seems far-fetched, but over time, they're going to become more conservative. It doesn't sound like it, but in Vermont, for example, they've elected this last cycle many more legislators than they had. They broke the back of the veto-proof majority, the supermajority that the Democrats had in the Vermont House. And even in Massachusetts, you see strong candidates coming forward, strong party. I think the opposite's going to happen, Michael. We're not going to get infected with the crazy politics of the Democrats. We're showing a different approach, and it's being taken up by surrounding states.
Scott Spradling, marketing guy. I thought Don't Mass Up New Hampshire was brilliant. And I had some people push back and say, no one in New Hampshire cares about Massachusetts. And I was trying to say, this isn't about Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a symbol for what Donald Trump would call crazy and whatever, you know what I mean? But that kind of that brand of Democratic advocacy that's more on the fringe than in the middle. Will that kind of counter marketing, if you will, we're not them, be good for Republicans in New Hampshire?
So to answer your question, I do think that we will remain an island. I think our political landscape is far more complicated. It's interesting listening to what Bill said. I have no idea what to expect from Vermont because we've all sort of like really defined that state as the progressive Bernie Sanders kind of a state, and the idea of them moving more to the right, they can't go any other direction. So that kind of makes sense. Massachusetts seems very structurally powered around the Democratic Party. They've got such a foothold. But again, if there's going to be any movement, it can only go in one direction. And then Maine, to me, is the wild, wild west. So I do think that even with the shifts that Bill's talking about, which I don't dispute are a distinct possibility, I do think that New Hampshire remains an island. I also think that we stay purple. I think that we've been in a pendulum for a while. And I know we've had a Republican governor for a long time, but we also had a Democratic governor for a long time before that. And we've seen the mix of the congressional delegation as well. So I think our pendulum will continue to show that we are a battleground state. We're purple. And, all things being equal, the two parties do still get along and get together and work things out. And I mean, looking at how closely split the majority was in the legislature just last cycle, those two parties were able to work together pretty effectively to pass a budget. So I actually think that we can show the way of people being able to collaborate and work together despite differences philosophically between the two parties.
So I'm sorry, New Hampshire Journal cannot end a podcast on a positive note. That's just not allowed. Okay. So we're not going to do that.
Throw a bomb.
I'm just going to remind Bill O'Brien that the last time a Republican won a federal election in Massachusetts, a general election, was 1994. Okay, it was the first term of Bill Clinton, and they haven't gotten close since. So that Massachusetts is not going Republican is not going to happen. That's that.
No, you've seen more unusual things happen. I know, Michael, in your career. So stick around, and you'll see it happen eventually.
I can't think of anything more unusual than a Republican winning a general election in Massachusetts for a federal race. I can't see that, but we shall see. But we also will see how lucky we were to have two smart guys on the podcast. Scott Spradling, Bill O'Brien, thanks so much for joining us here at New Hampshire Journal. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Michael.